Hello everyone and welcome to Bendigo Writers Festival Backstory, a fantastic series where we get to interview and chat with some of Australia's best authors and illustrators. And we're in for a treat today because joining us is the wonderful gardener, designer, author himself, Paul Bangay, whose brand new book, Stonefields by the Seasons, has just hit the shops as we speak. Before we begin, I'd just like to tell you that I am joining you from the Jara country, the lands on which the Dja Wurrung and the Taungurung peoples have been performing their age-old ceremonies of law and culture for millennia. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This land was never ceded, it always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. So Paul, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I have to say I'm a little bit of a fraud chatting to you today because I have two blue thumbs. I don't I don't really garden. I have a very good attitude. My favourite thing about gardening is reading books like yours, where I can pore over the sumptuous pictures and read all the fabulous names of plants that I can't pronounce and then go out and commiserate about how shocking my own garden is. Paul, you are acknowledgeably one of Australia's most recognisable and best awarded designers and gardeners, and you burst onto our scenes
a long time ago.
I'm not implying anything, but it's been a while now. 25 years in print and obviously a few more years before that. You've been one of the amazing people who's managed to win a medal of the Order of Australia in 2018 for your services to gardening and landscape design, which I think is absolutely extraordinary and well deserved, obviously. And what I wanted to do just to start off, before we launch into this fantastic new book, I just wanted to, for people who haven't been following your journey, I wanted to take everybody back to where it all began, where you first got your fingers dirty in soil. Do you remember that moment?
I don't remember the exact moment, but what I do remember really vividly is always being fascinated with gardens, and always, my mother had a beautiful garden, and whenever you hear any podcast or interview with any landscape designer, they always say, you know, my mother had a beautiful garden, or I grew up in a beautiful garden. And I think that that is a prerequisite, it seems to be, for being a designer, a landscape designer. But my mother did have a beautiful garden, and she encouraged us kids, there were 4 of us, to actually go out and work in the garden and to appreciate the garden and always be outside in the garden. And they were very active in the Australian native plant movement, and they bought a block of land down at Wilson's Promontory and with a whole lot of other people, and they rewild that. And so we were always, during our childhood, planting trees, or, you know, going to Society for Growing Australian Native Plant events, or, you know, our whole world seemed to revolve around plants and gardens when I was a young boy. And I just loved it. You know, it wasn't a matter of telling a kid to go out and weed the garden beds and for that child to think it's a chore. I used to just love being out there. And I think my parents saw that in me. And so I was the child that got the bigger veggie garden, and then got a greenhouse because I nagged my father for a greenhouse, then got a rockery and a fernery and fountains, and, you know, it just sort of snowballed from there on in. And I just developed that great love of gardens from a very, very early age.
And did you share that with friends sort of outside the family, or were you conscious that that was sort of a bit of an unusual pastime?
No, look, you know, I didn't think it was unusual. I don't know why I didn't think it unusual, but I think my friends definitely thought it was unusual, and my friends still think it's quite unusual. I can remember I grew up in Vermont, like outer east of Melbourne, and we had 10 acres there, and I had the big veggie garden there, but I also had goats. I was obsessed with goats. And so I would milk the goats morning and night every day. And I remember when my friends were going to a concert at the Maya Music Bowl, and I was having a goat that was just about to kid, and I went, I can't come, my goat's about to kid. And they were all laughing at me going, no, you're just making up, that's an excuse. And of course, the goat did kid that day, and they thought I was a bit peculiar, but I never thought it was strange.
No, not at all. So then it obviously wasn't strange for you to go and study at UniMelb, and you did a Bachelor of Applied Science in Horticulture.
Yeah.
Again, were there, did people think, you know, why on earth are you going down that track? Or by that stage, had you established that that's really where you wanted to go?
My father he ended up Pro Vice Chancellor at RMIT, so he was an academic. And my mother being the great gardener and the great lover of plants and design, and my father being the academic. So my father said to me, so you want to do landscaping? And I thought maybe at that stage I just wanted to be in gardens. I didn't quite know. This is when I was quite young, maybe in year 9 or something. And I said, I don't have to go to, why do you have to go to university to, you know, I'm already out in the garden working. Why do I have to go to university? And he said, okay, well, you'll go off to sit for a Melbourne Council gardener's position. And I went in, and there were literally 30 or 40 people applying for this one job, and you had to sit there and do this sort of entry exam. And then I walked out and I went, no, that's not for me. Yeah. And he said, well, we're going down to see the Chancellor at Burnley, back then, was independent of Melbourne Uni. And I just fell in love with Burnley, and I always knew I wanted to, you know, I worked to get into Burnley. You had to do, I think, 3 or 4 science courses in HSC back then. And I just knew that's what I was passionate about and wanted to do. So it was a natural progression for me to get to end up studying there. And I was blessed. It was the best course, and still was. They've tinkered around with it quite a lot. It doesn't really exist so much anymore. But it was the best course you could do in landscape design. Emma Walling studied there. So she did the same course 50, 60 years early before me.
Yeah. So what do you think were your most important lessons from that time and influences?
Well, I think the good thing about Burnley back then was it was very, it was theory-based and practically based. And so it was a very big garden. It was a von Mueller garden. It was done by von Mueller, very important garden. But it also had an orchard and a nursery and a lot of, you know, established garden. So you worked in the garden as well as studying. And I think, you know, what was great was actually knowing how to grow plants and how to tend after plants, as well as doing the design and all that part of it. So it wasn't just like now where they just sit and they study landscape architecture and they never go into a garden. It was a lot of practical. So you actually got your fingers in the ground. You actually knew how to propagate plants, how to tend the plants. And I think that was one of the biggest things I took away from starting at Burnley.
One of the things that comes through very strongly, I've bought a number of your books over the years for people in my family that can garden, one of the things that seems to come through very strongly is that sense, the through lines you have and of course it makes complete sense now that your latest book is about the 4 seasons at Stonefields. And I wonder whether, do you feel that that's something maybe newer gardeners or more inexperienced gardeners don't see their garden in terms of the through lines of growth and planning and design, or does that just come with experience?
Very good question. Look, I think it's vital that they do. Like, I think, you know, following a plant from right from the very beginning when it's a seed or a cutting and right up to maturity is invaluable. And I think, you know, for a lot of designers that don't do that or don't know about that, I say, go get practical advice, go work in a nursery, go work for a landscaper. Even if you want to sit and do landscape architecture in an office, go and do practical things first, because it's really important to see how that plant started and how it's going to end up. And, you know, how big that'll tell you how big it is, how much space it needs, what environment it'll grow in, you know. So I think you're right. I don't think many people study that anymore or know much about that, but they should, because I think it's absolutely vital. And of course you do, with time, get to know all that, because, you know, you design gardens, you put them in, and then you watch them, you know, in my case, 30, 35 years later, and see them mature. And you think, maybe I planted that tree too close to the one next door before. So you're always learning, but I think it's very important that they do.
So Stonefields by the Seasons, this is your 10th book, I think.
I think it's the 11th book now.
11th book.
Yeah. 10th
But
with
as you
Penguin,
said,
but I've done another one with Thames and Hudson for Monash University.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
But this is your second book about Stonefields,
Yes.
and in the first, which I found quite moving, because you introduced us to the garden at, well, it's called the Garden at Stonefields in 2013. Here's one that Paul prepared earlier. And it was really about the establishment of your amazing country garden and the homestead. And you took us through the reasons why you decided to establish that garden. To me, Stonefields by the Seasons is almost as if it's a love letter to one of your most important personal and professional works. You're
Yeah.
15 years plus into that relationship with Stonefields.
Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. And when I moved here from Woodend, I was at the old schoolhouse in Woodend, and Woodend just started to become a bit too urbanised. They started making the footpaths and putting gutters in, and a lot more houses. And I thought, I've got to go somewhere where it's truly rural, and create a garden that I can be in for life. And I just stumbled across this piece of land over here. It just happened to fluke. Good soil, good water, elevation, all the things I wanted, I just found in the first run. But the first book was all about establishing the garden, and this book now is all about an established garden and what you do in an established garden, and what you do season to season in an established garden, just to keep it looking fresh and keep engaged with the garden. You don't want ever a garden to be too static. You want it to always be a bit more dynamic, and so that's what this book is. But it's a very good thing to call it a love letter, because we sort of flirt with the idea of, well, it's quite big, and and I'm getting a little older, and what does that look like in 20 years time? Do I have to work really hard to support 2 gardeners to look after it? And do we move on and create one that's sort of, a garden that's more suitable for sort of retirement? And I just can't bear the thought of leaving here. No. So that love letter could never be a Dear John letter. It has to be a love letter always, I think.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that's fascinating about the book. When I first came across your work, it was very structural, very symmetrical, very neat and tidy. I imagined you out there with your nail scissors, chopping your lovely boxes and all the rest of it. And in your new book, you talk very much about the fact that you've mellowed and you've relaxed a little bit, and you've even argued with Tim, your head gardener, about removing some defining box hedges from the middle of gardens. Wow, that's that cathartic?
That argument goes on. So it's part of aging and getting older. I think you do soften, and you definitely do mellow. But also the world has moved on. Very much the worldwide trend, and not that we have to follow exact trends, but the worldwide trend is definitely for rewilding spaces, softer, more casual, more relaxed gardens. And it's something that 20 years ago I would never have contemplated, and now I just absolutely love. So we're always having arguments about maybe the parterre is too formal, I want to rip it out and just fill it with flowers. And he goes, but it's taken us years, like over a decade to create this, and how much time and love and effort's gone into looking after it. And there's a big dilemma between what you created 16 years ago and what you would like it to be now. And quite often, and well, for me in particular, that style has changed. And I'm sort of stuck with something that looks beautiful, but is not really what I want to see in a garden today. But I can't bring myself to pull it out and start again.
I wonder whether, just looking at gardens like Versailles that have parterre gardens on steroids, I wonder whether there's that sense of it's all alive and it's growing, but in some ways does a garden become stilted almost because you're trying to keep it as a living monument to something rather than letting it evolve and become something that it
Well, I
wants.
think that's what those French gardens have. I mean, they're museum pieces. That's exactly what they are. And they will never change them because they're so, protective of them. But if you look at a lot of the English gardens, a lot of the English gardens evolved over the years. There was a great gardener called Capability Brown.
Yep.
And he was all about pulling out the parterres and just creating this beautiful casual, what we think today is this Arcadian sort of English landscape. In fact, it's all artificially created, but he was all about pulling out the formal and softening. So what he was doing is what I want to do now, really.
Yeah.
So, but I think the English are much better at sort of constantly adapting and changing their gardens to the way people want to live. And I think that's a really good, valid point. And Versailles is obviously not how anyone wants to live anymore.
Well, unless you've got a few hundred gardeners.
Yes, exactly.
And you can.
And you're very uptight.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got very sharp nail scissors. So, what do you think has changed? What are the things that you will never let go of in Stonefields?
I think, and I thought about this if we did move and what we would create, and I consciously think about this when I create new gardens is, I don't think I never want to let go of the architecture of the garden. Like, I think, it's great to bring all this froth and flowers and softness and curves and organic lines, but, I think a garden still needs some structure. It needs some architecture in it. Whether that's a wall or whether it's a bit of a hedge or, it's a little bit of a formal layout. But within that, there's a lot of softness. So I think for me, a lot of people now are just all about paddocks with just low garden beds and they just sort of drift out to the landscape. I still like to contain it a little bit and put a little bit of formality in the outer part of the garden and then let all the softness come within that. So I think probably the architecture is something that, that I wouldn't let go of. But
and that's brought into really stark contrast when you look. I love the fact that the books, obviously, because it's through the seasons, it's divided into the 4 seasons, the European seasons, and in the winter and summer you've Simon Griffith, your wonderful photographer, has photographed almost from the same spot in the garden to show that the really sort of structural aspects of those bare roses, and then
well, that's what I love about winter. I love the fact that a lot of people despair about winter, but up here in the we're in the Central Highlands and it snows, which you'll see in the book. And Bendigo gets very cold in the winter. I love that the plants die down. I love that we cut the perennials down. I love the fact that all the flowers has almost disappeared, and then the hedges come into their own. So you can see that architecture, you can see that structure in the garden, especially when frost sits on top of them or there's snow sitting on them. They just look amazing. So it's that wonderful sort of backdrop that you wouldn't get in a normal garden if you didn't have that architecture there in the wintertime.
And I suppose for you as a gardener, knowing that garden so well, it keeps it fresh for you. It's something new every season.
There is, and we try and get in as many layers as we can. So we plant a lot of bulbs, so we get very early spring, late winter, spring flowers, and then the perennials come over the top of that, or the roses might come. So we try and get those layers in, and those bulbs I can change yearly. I can shake those up, but there's a great deal of frustration for a designer owning a garden that's sort of mature. Like, you're always looking to put a bit of freshness in, or you're always looking to create something new. So for me, it's very dangerous because we've got 100 acres here and I just keep adding new areas as I get frustrated. And then you've got to look after them. So, what was a very manageable garden, 16 years ago is now becoming to this sort of monster that needs to be constantly looked after.
So you're obviously a very hands-on gardener.
Yeah, I don't get much time. During the good thing about this year is that we've been locked down in the garden here for nearly the last 12 months. I travel, I work all over Australia and a bit in Europe. So I used to travel every week. I used to be on a plane every week. And for the last, I don't know, since March, I haven't been able to go anywhere. And so we've been in the garden full time, and that's just been wonderful. So that's given me more time to get out there and actually work in the garden. And, you know, the anxiety levels have been sort of in overdrive sometimes this year. And as soon as I feel anxiety, all I do is go out and manually work in the garden, like wheelbarrow compost or dig some weeds, and the anxiety just disappears. It's incredible. Like the power of gardens is really amazing.
Do you think was Stonefields a book that could have been written in any other year than a COVID year?
Well, I didn't write it. I mean, you know what the books are like. They've got a lag time.
Yes.
I didn't really write it in the COVID years, but it's come out in a good time because people apparently, you know, we despaired 25 years ago when I started doing books. Book sales were fantastic, and you know, we've seen the demise of sort of printed books and especially coffee table books in the last 10 years. But this year, apparently book sales are through the roof again. It's just wonderful to see people engaging with books again because, you know, as a garden designer, you know, and you just become, the whole world becomes plants and gardens and all those sort of things. And to be able to do something else that's related to it, like writing, I just love writing. And to be able to produce books is just, it's a gift for me. It's really a wonderful, wonderful gift that I've been given and I'm able to do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about obviously about the book, but the actual making of a gardening book, because I'm not sure how many people, I know lots of people love to buy them. I know that we're coming up to the time of year where lots of people start thinking, you know, what can I get so-and-so, great Aunt Flora. But I wonder how many people really stop and think about the process of writing a garden or a design book. And you're having done 11 books now. You're obviously very well versed in that, pardon the pun. One thing I wanted to start with was you obviously have a very strong working relationship with Simon Griffiths, who it's almost as if do you finish each other's sentences, or does he just understand the way your mind works? Or
really, like, you know, when I first started, I never thought of doing books, and I had this wonderful publisher, Julie Gibbs, who was the head publisher at Penguin for a long, long time. And she came to me, she was at Allen and Unwin, and she came to me and said, I think it's time you do a book. And I thought, a book? I never thought about doing a book. And then I thought about it a bit more and I thought, well, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to do? And so Julie, you know, matched me with Simon Griffiths. She said, look, you're starting out, Simon's starting out, and he's a young photographer, you're a young garden designer and writer, and put us together. And we just understood each other. And back in those days, we'd go out and he'd use the old-fashioned film, and we'd take Polaroids and we'd fold the Polaroids to make sure that we got the right angle. And of course, now it's all digital. It's so much easier. But I think because we've gone through that process and we've done so many books together, he knows how I want a garden to look through the lens, and he just understands that. So we've just got this great synergy between the photography and the actual publishing. I mean, we find the only complication with that is the artwork, like finding a person who can actually then take Simon's photographs and take my vision for how the book looks. That's a variable that sometimes gets changed and mixed up a little bit. But for the photography, Simon and I are just like, you know, we're almost as one, as you say.
So do you find sometimes you're almost composing the book thinking what shot will go with it, or does one influence the other or not?
What happens is usually the photographs come first. So, you know, Simon's, you know, with this book, for instance, I said to Simon, I'm going to do this book on the 4 seasons. Well, Simon's been documenting this garden for the last 16 years. So he lives in Kyneton, he lives nearby. So he's always coming out and photographing gardens. But you know, probably, and I write like it's a diary. I just write from my heart. I write, you know, just how I would experience the garden, what I'm doing in the garden, you know, how I would treat the garden in terms of the design and in terms of the practicalities as well. So it just spews out of me. It's not, you know, it's not a beautiful piece of writing, but it's actually how I'm thinking and how I'm actually processing things. It just goes down to paper. So if I'm doing something like that and I'm writing something and I think, I need Simon to photograph that. I'll ring him up and go, actually, I'm writing now about like the viburnum out in the woodland. Can you make sure we've got photographs of that? So a little bit of that does definitely go on.
Yeah. Do you write in the garden? Do you, because I got the sense that I was there with you. I've never been to Stonefields, but as if I was sort of trailing along behind you when you were doing this stream of consciousness, telling me, and now we're doing this, and I've chosen to do that, and it was like having a tour with you.
So this will be a terrible confession, but most of it probably happened on a Qantas flight or in a Qantas club. I've got this uncanny ability just to write anywhere. And my husband says to me, he says, I don't know how you just wake up and there you are writing, or you're just writing somewhere. As I think of something, I just go and tend to write it down. But I think that goes back to, I do have this ability, and I think this is a gift that I've got, to be able to always go to a site and always remember how I want that garden to look. Mm-hmm. So I've got this great memory, and my memory's not great with other things, but for this one particular thing, it's really good. I can go onto a site, think I want to look like this, this and that. I can come back a month later and remember when I'm at my drawing board exactly how that space looked and how I want it to look in the future when I'm designing it. And it does for when I'm writing as well. So I can be sitting with a lot of distractions happening around me and just writing and remembering exactly what is out in that part of the garden, or, you know, what I want to write about with the other part of the garden. So I think that's just one ability that's sort of translated back into writing.
And I wondered too whether there's also echoes of conversations that you've had over the years, all those hundreds and hundreds of puff pastry layers with your parents and family and other people interested in gardens, and you've sort of taken on that that tense of I always get my tenses muddled up. Present perfect continuous, I think, is what you are mostly writing in. But that sense of that we're here and you're talking about it in the same way that probably your parents spoke to you as you were pottering around, glass house or shoveling manure, whatever.
Yeah, and that's possibly right. I mean, I have actually been blessed to have quite a few mentors. And, I've had lots of conversations with them over the years about talking about gardens. So it could have come from that, it could have come from the ability of, being able to have conversations with wonderful mentors or parents, or, gardeners are great at chatting about gardens. And they can talk for a long time about gardens.
Yeah. Well, I suppose because they're relaxed and they're at peace mostly.
And they're passionate. I think it's passion, being passionate about something allows you to write well and to talk well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think too, what you were saying about the fact that if you've got that structural aspect of your garden, you've got the backdrop in a way, and you're playing out the theatre of the garden in front of it. You're one of the actors on the stage, without sounding cliched and ho-hum. But when you're doing that, often that's when the dialogue flows. And yes. I get the sense that that's what's happened. Well, even if you have been doing it on a Qantas flight, I have been completely sucked in, I have to say.
I'm sorry. But it does go back to that good memory of being in the garden. So. I will
erase all memories of sitting, watching you cramped. Anyway, so you've said that writing is something you like. Does it feed your soul in the same way that gardening and design does?
Yes, it does. It definitely does. Like, I think being able to document what you do, which is with writing, is a blessing and a great joy. And it does give me that same passion it's definitely the same passion I get as with gardens. So that's what I was saying before. I'm lucky to have both those things. And they're completely, writing and gardening are two completely separate things. It's wonderful to have two things in your life that you're absolutely passionate about and you love doing.
Mm. And I hadn't realised it, as I said, not being a good gardener, but I know that my uncle and aunt, who were amazing gardeners, they kept journals of what they were doing throughout the year, and from one year to the next, what worked and what didn't. So that's obviously a practice you keep in a way. Yes,
well, with the first Stonefields book, it was just it was just a diary I kept. The whole book was based on a diary I'd kept for a long, long time. So yeah, I always keep, and we're 2 year and a half ago, we bought a little cottage in the Cotswolds in England.
Oh,
and I know it's just so beautiful. We can't get there. It's just terrible.
that's awful.
We're creating the garden now, but I'm keeping a journal on that. So, you know, I just, as we're doing things, COVID, so that's where the COVID will come into it, you know, about creating a garden from afar, you know, how we found this place. So, you know, I am creating a journal on that, and that will probably translate into a book one day as well, I'd say.
Yeah.
So journal writing is definitely a big part of it.
Yes. The other thing that I find so interesting is that, as well as, you know, scattering, you're wandering us along the paths and in and out of the different rooms and telling us about the plants, and then all of a sudden one of those wonderful Latin names pops in that I have to look up how to pronounce. But then you've got that fantastic little, at the end of every season, you list for us, here's a bookmark I prepared earlier, you list all of the wonderful plants and the tasks that you have to do, and the plants that you're using. So do you very much see this as a sort of a tonic and a help, a teaching tool for people?
I do, and I just love writing about the garden. And that's my big stick, you know, just writing about how it looks and, you know, how we got it to look like that. And the publishers always say to me, no, you need to give practical advice as well. And so, you know, really that came from the publishers. But when I thought about it, I thought that's actually a really great idea, because people want to know what you can do in winter, what you can do in spring. And people don't necessarily know that what you do in autumn is going to be showing and looking beautiful in spring. So, you know, it's all about how you create a garden and how you make it look good for certain seasons, but you might have to do them 2 seasons before that. A lot of people don't know that. So that, I know that practical advice is what people really appreciate. And that's what, you know, that's the experience I've got after working for 30 years. And, you know, be able to give that to people is a great joy.
Mm. So you've chosen to start the book in autumn, which for me, autumn's my favourite time of the year, but I also find that the little death, you start to get ready for winter, and all the things that you're going to miss out on. Is there a reason you decided to start the book in autumn?
No, we thought to start it in autumn because all the seasons are beautiful up here, but I don't like summer, so I wanted to put summer
right at the back.
And autumn is about a time of putting the garden, like you say, putting the garden to sleep. So we get all the beauty of the autumn trees. We've got amazing autumn trees here, but the heat of summer is usually over. And I just love it when we get to autumn and you know, late March, that you don't have to worry about bushfires, you don't have to worry about flies, you don't have to worry about drought. You know, you've got all these beautiful 3 seasons ahead of you that you can sit back and actually enjoy the garden. So I thought, let's start with a good season and finish with the bad season.
Do you find your earth is so much warmer at the end of autumn as you're starting to go into winter? Does it?
So autumn is the best time to plant trees or plants because there is warmth in the soil. So. You know, and I've really learned this from working in Europe. So, you know, you never plant trees in spring or winter over there. You plant them in autumn because you need that warmth in the soil just to settle them in and just give them a little bit of a start before the harsh winters start. So, you know, definitely our soil is beautiful and warm in the autumn. It's a lovely time to plant up here. And we get very cold winter, so you wouldn't really want to be too much planting then.
No, it's amazing the amount of snow it's just fantastic. You must.
Well, and the sad thing about this is climate change, because you know, as a gardener, we just know it's happening. And when I first moved here, we used to get a big dump of snow every year. One of the first years I moved here, I think it was the second year, where they actually closed the roads. I mean, by European standards, we didn't have much, but it was enough for everyone to be skidding off the road up here. So they closed the roads down. We haven't seen that in a long time. Like every year, the amount of snow we get is less and less and less, and they're just flurries sometimes. But when we get it, it's just so magical. And you try and time it. Like I might be in Sydney working, and I hear it's going to be snowing, so I cancel a whole lot of clients and just race back to Melbourne on the faint hope that it's going to be snowing. And quite often it's not.
So that you can freeze to death.
Yes. Yeah.
So how's your planting changed then over the years? Are you moving more towards using native plants, or?
We've always used a lot of natives in our gardens, and we are using a lot more natives now. I think that's a great. I think where the incorporation of natives is really sort of helping establish an Australian style is that we haven't been really strict about using only natives.
Yes.
We've gone and said, okay, well, the natives are actually really well adapted to our conditions. They don't need as much water. They're tougher. They take the heat better. So let's use quite a lot of them in our gardens. But, if there's a Mediterranean plant that suits as well, let's put that in there. If there's some sort of flowering one that, doesn't need as much water, let's use that as well. And I think that's where it's been just marvellous, because I think that's really giving a lot of the young designers this beautiful Australian style that's incorporating a little bit of our history, but a lot of our Australian native plants. And we use a lot of Australian native plants as well. We use a lot of porreas and stringias and syzygiums, and there's lots of them that we're using now. But the young designers are sort of predominantly using natives and mixing them with other tough plants. And I think that's giving us this really exciting new style for Australia.
Have you discovered plants at Stonefields that you haven't planted but have come up and they've sort of grown through what's there already, or was it pretty much a greenfield site?
It was pretty much a greenfield site. I mean, the only thing that the weeds blow in, that bloody Cape weed blows in. That's about the only thing that really sort of comes in that we really hate. Noxious.
I grew that really well.
Yeah. Noxious weeds are the things that seem to blow in quite a lot that pop up. Look, this was potato country around here, so it was pretty well cleared.
Yeah.
We have got some beautiful eucalyptus not regnans. We've got the manna gums, and they are just spectacular. They're like 300 or 400 years old. So we're absolutely blessed that we've got these big groups of manna gums to give us some size and some sense of establishment. I'm looking at them right now at the window. They're just glorious, and we're blessed to have those.
Yeah. When people come to visit Stonefields, I was just doing some research for this. I was really blown away that people can order books and book the tours to come and see you. And there's a beautiful note from you saying now, because of COVID, it might take a bit longer if you want the book signed. I might be in between things. Do you have a lot of sort of contact with people getting in touch with you? Yeah, through in that way?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we get a lot of, I mean, the difficult thing is with Instagram. I mean, a lot of people with Instagram direct message you now.
Yes.
And so you might open up your Instagram and there might be 30 or 40 or 50 messages there every day. And they might be just people saying how much they enjoy the Instagram or how much they've enjoyed the garden. And you can type back a little quick, but a lot of people, ask, what can I do with this corner of my garden? And what can I do with that corner of my garden? And what plant can I use there? And when it's on an industrial level, it makes it quite difficult to engage with everyone that way. And you feel mean if you don't engage with them. So it's got more difficult that way.
Yeah. So plans post-COVID will you be able to open up again?
So we've just looked at it now. So our tours, we rang the Department of Health today, and said, what are we allowed to do? Because it's very, very vague what you can and can't do. So we're allowed to have groups of 10. And so we're allowed to resume those. They start again in late November, thank God, because we've really missed it. And our gardeners are quite cantankerous old things. They're quite difficult, and they don't like people, interfering in their garden. But they said to me, "Are the tours happening?" I went, "Oh, they might happen in November." And I said, "Don't you want them to happen?" And they go, "No, we really want them to happen." So I think they've missed having people in the garden as well. I mean, they love the feedback they get from people walking around the garden and saying what a great job they've done.
Do your so Tim is your
He's our head gardener, yes.
head gardener, and obviously lives in or near the area.
So he's like 10 minutes away.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And we've got a young gardener called Remy who moved from Melbourne, and we thought, we don't know how this is going to go, but he's been with us for 5 or 6 years now, and he moved to Taradale and just absolutely loves the countryside. So bring a city boy, moved to the country, never wants to go back to the city ever again. So we're lucky to have two people who love the country and live nearby and just love working in country gardens.
Yeah. Having grown up in Melbourne, I mean, even though Vermont's not well, it's not exactly a landlocked suburb, but you're not down by the sea.
No.
But you're obviously very happy living inland.
Yes, I'm not an ocean person. I'm not a sea person. I mean, funny enough, when I was growing up, I used to love surfing a little bit, but I'm a mountain boy, so I love the mountain.
Yeah.
I just love I like altitude, so we just love cold winters, and you can only get those in the mountain. I love mountain air. So, I don't crave to be, unlike 99.99% of the rest of the Australian population, I don't crave to be by the ocean.
So when we're all sweltering here in the summer heat, is that when you shoot off to the Cotswolds when you're allowed to?
That is. So we normally go in summer. I think Australia, like where we are in particular, is beautiful up until Christmas. Like, you get the hot days, but you can bear it up until Christmas. And then if you can get out for January and a little bit of February, and the worst of the heat, and then you come back and you've only got like 4 or 5 weeks of extreme heat again, you can sort of tolerate that. I just don't like extreme heat. It's worse.
It's funny though to think, I mean, you're now not in Woodend and Macedon, but to think that they were sort of considered the equivalents of the hill stations of India.
That's right, exactly. I mean, Mount Macedon still is. I spent a lot of time in Mount Macedon.
Yeah.
It definitely is cooler. It's cooler, and at our place too, it's cooler at night, definitely cooler.
Right. Yeah.
So you might get the hot days, but come 4 or 5 o'clock, the temperature starts dropping quite fast. And I think that's why they fled to those places, because the summer nighttime temperatures, I think, were a lot cooler than the daytime temperatures.
And you've built Stonefields, the actual the buildings themselves to orient. You've oriented the building to take in the best of the gardens. Well,
so I was very lucky. I mean, I bought it primarily because it was sitting on the edge of this valley, on the top of the hill, on the edge of the valley, and looked down this magnificent view to the valley. And that's Bendigo's water supply. So we're heavily protected because of your water. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And that happened so we fluked everything. So that happened to face north. And so we get the lovely sun coming in. So I designed a house only 1 room wide, so you can get a view out to the back to the garden and down to the view of the valley and the garden on the valley side, and also with very big deep eaves. So I looked at the Italian villas and saw what they did so well. So we don't get any summer sun in the house. We get winter sun in the house.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it's just perfect for up here. And we always, wherever you look from any one of the rooms, you're looking into a garden space.
Incredible. And you've also got space for people to come and stay, I noticed. You have,
which is started up again a little while ago. So we've got a B&B next door. The next door neighbour had this sort of 1980s house, and she was so lovely. She looked after. It was about 2 or 3 of us in this little area, and she always kept an eye out because she was the full-time resident. And she said, "I'm going to sell. Would you like to buy it?" And I went, "No, I don't want another house." And she goes, "But someone with a motorbike might buy it." And I thought, "Oh, that's not going to be so good." So anyway, I ended up buying it, and we've turned it into a B&B, and it's been so successful because it's got a beautiful garden. And so people come up, they can enjoy what I enjoy. They get the beautiful central highlands, they get a garden wrapped around them, and they get to have an hour in our garden. So and they get all the beautiful restaurants we have around here. It's a great place to come and stay.
And we've also got some amazing gardens, municipal gardens. I mean, I don't know is it the Malmesbury?
Malmesbury's got them. Dalesford's got them. Kyneton's got them.
Castlemaine's got beautiful.
I mean, because we're all the gold mining towns, there was a lot of money back then, and they put them into beautiful buildings and beautiful gardens, and we've got that wonderful heritage. So there are lots of very good municipal gardens. Little Malmesbury, which is tiny, it's got the magnificent botanic gardens.
Yeah. So the takeaway messages of it, I haven't really touched on it much about the issues of climate change, but that weaves its way very strongly, but in a gentle, strong way throughout your book. Takeaway messages from this latest book. You really talk about the relationship that we all have to water and soil and the environment, as well as structure.
Yeah.
What do you hope people will take from this book?
I think, just being aware that climate change is happening, that we have to adapt our planting. And I talk about a lot of that, moving away from sort of softer, more English things to hardier Mediterranean things, or using a lot of perennials that do well in the extreme heat. Looking after the soil. I mean, I think Australians, we've traditionally, we've inherited bad soil in Australia, and looking after your soil is the best thing you can do. And that helps the environment because we compost. So we take all the rubbish from our kitchen, make it into compost. I mean, it's just an age-old thing, but we've forgotten how to do it, and put it back into the garden. So you're reducing landfill and you're making your garden healthier. It's just such an easy thing to do. So, looking after the soil, not using as much water as you can, and adapting your planting styles. They're three key things we could be doing.
When you're working with new clients, do you come across people who it's sort of a revelation for them that composting and soil quality, it's not just about importing truckloads of soil from somewhere else, but it's about building?
I think it's a big revelation for all Australians, really. I mean, there's a great book. If anyone wants a really good book on this, I've got some great friends in England called The Land Gardeners. And they've got a beautiful book out. It's just an amazing book. And they talk about, it's primarily about flowers and picking flowers and using them inside. But their big stick is on soil health. And, if you improve the health of soil and you improve the microbial activity in there, that takes a lot of carbon out of the air. So, they're talking about the soil health and how it can, decarbonize the planet, and it can increase the fertility and increase the, the sense of agriculture and our gardens. So, a lot of Australians don't know about that, really. And I went on their talking tour around Australia, and people were just astonished by what you can achieve with just looking after the soil.
Because it's one of the easiest things to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, just take your scraps.
But you know what? We do take it for granted living in the country. I live mostly in the country, but I have a little apartment in Sydney that I go to, and it'd be very hard to compost there.
You'd have big bins on your veranda or your balcony, wouldn't you?
A tiny little balcony that, has got no contact with the soil. So, for some people, it's very easy to do and a no-brainer, but for a lot of people, it's very hard to do. And that's where councils should step in. And we should have communal composting, to be able to compost somewhere in our suburbs, somewhere.
Because it's such a, when you think about it, it's such an amazing resource that we're just throwing away. I don't understand.
It's exactly right. I mean, when we look at all we throw out into the compost heap, and then I dig that up and put it in the veggie garden, I just think, how beautiful is all this? And it smells beautiful. It's sweet and it's full of worms, and you just think, and I'm going to eat this because it's going to, I'm going to grow vegetables out of this. And I think this came from all the rubbish from my stinking rotten compost bin that we don't clean out often enough. And I think, how wonderful is that?
Yeah, perfect. So do you have favourite veggies that you like to grow?
I try and grow as many vegetables as I can. So my husband is a great cook. Right. So I do the growing and he does the cooking.
Excellent.
And, so we grow a very diverse range of vegetables, and it's more driven from Barry seeing a recipe and thinking, oh, I'd like to, you to grow that. So next year I sort of plant those sort of things. So, we grow very good potatoes up here, obviously. Yeah. But this year I'm aiming to get the best gooseberries in Victoria, unusual things.
Yes.
All sorts of veggies we grow. Asparagus, we got beautiful asparagus up here.
Yeah, yeah. Now gooseberries, my mum used to love gooseberries. Is that what sort of got transformed into eventually kiwi fruit?
No. So they're Chinese.
Completely different. Oh, Chinese.
gooseberries are called kiwi fruit, but the little gooseberry is just a tiny, tiny little berry, and it's quite tart. And the English are absolutely mad about growing them. They have competitions to grow the biggest gooseberry, but I just love them. I think they're so beautiful. I make a gooseberry granita from them, and that's about the only thing I can do. But we're going to try for gooseberry full this year and see.
Oh no, I was just about to say you're going to do a full.
We're going to do a full. We're going
You have to practice your full cooking if you're going back to the Cotswolds.
I know, that's right, exactly. Yeah.
Obviously, to be a great gardener, you need to be patient.
Yeah.
Have you always been patient, or
not at all? It's funny. I'm a very impatient person, but I'm very patient when it comes to gardens, and I don't know what. I mean, you just have to. I mean, you've got no choice.
Yeah.
I think because I started when I was young, I've just learned how impatient you have to be with gardens, and you can't change that. So I'm not one for buying big trees. We grow sort of, we buy medium-sized trees, small to medium-sized trees, and let them watch. But one of the greatest joys at the moment is watching our oak trees grow. Like, they're 16 years old now, and they're just getting to a stage. I'm looking at a couple now that are just feeling mature. I can walk underneath them. We get shade underneath them. Our front paddock that we drive through is littered with them. We've filled it all up with oak, and they're just starting to get a sense of a park now. And that's just, just absolute bliss being able to see those grow.
And animals? Do you have dogs or cats?
We have a dog.
A dog?
Yeah. Ruby, the Cocker Spaniel, who's the love of our life. We have cows. We have British white cattle, which are just, very sort of glamorous, expensive lawn mowers. That's all they do. And look good.
Oh, so you don't milk them?
No, I don't milk them. They just eat the grass down. And we've got chickens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So no goats anymore?
No goats anymore. No, it's too much of a commitment, like milking 365 days of the year, morning and night.
You could get Tim or
that would not go down well.
Maybe not? No. Okay. Maybe that's not such a good idea. So where to next for you? You've got Cotswolds to work on?
Yeah. I think the future is spending a bit more time in England, dividing our time between England and Australia a bit more. And it sounds a real cop-out, but, England's going to be a great place to be when climate change gets really bad. Because, when you're elevating the temperature from 10 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees Celsius, it's not that bad. But, spending more time in England, probably, creating more gardens over there. I've been doing a little bit of work in France. A lovely big walled garden in France. So that's led on to a few other jobs in France. So, probably a little bit more work in Europe is where the lies.
And are they mostly private gardens that you're working on, or yeah?
They are. We finished the little book we did for Monash University was on Prato. They've got a campus there.
Yes.
We did a courtyard they had out the back, a really large courtyard. And so that was a bit of a public project. We don't do many public projects, mostly domestic.
Yeah. Just by choice, or because it's easier to work with one person?
To be honest, we haven't been asked to do many public commissions. I think you sort of get pigeonholed between domestic or public, and we've sort of gone down the domestic route.
So for a non-gardener like me, what's your advice? Apart from going on buying and reading and poring over books like yours?
Reading is a very good place to start. Like reading, I think traveling, like seeing, going and seeing as many gardens as you can. When we could, I used to go to the Middle East every second year. So I've been to Syria and looked at gardens. I've been to Iran and looked at gardens. I've been to Jordan and looked at gardens. Spain. So going to similar climates as ours.
Yeah.
And looking at what grows there and how they deal with plant material there. California, I spent a lot of time in California looking at the gardens. So travel, reading, experimenting. So I think that, experimenting is what all gardeners do. And, it's okay to make a mistake. Put a plant in, it dies. We've learned.
And you're very open. Well, I think in all of your books, you're very open about what's worked and what hasn't. And I noticed someone in one of the reviews said, people really love it when they see you making mistakes and they go, hooray!
People love mistakes.
Even Paul makes mistakes.
Everyone makes mistakes with gardens, but that's the wonderful thing about gardening, I think.
Yeah, but you often don't see them on those 7-minute long TV segments of
Gardening Australia things. And they should do really more about mistakes, because every single person makes them, you know. And if you don't make them, then you're not adventurous enough. Like, you know, if you're not going to give it a go, you've got to be prepared to make mistakes, to have, you know, great fun in the garden, I think.
Yeah. So as we wind up for today, summer for you, if you have to be out in the heat, what's your go-to thing to do in the garden in the heat?
Summer is getting up very early in the morning, going out and watering, working in the veggie garden before it gets too hot, then coming inside and spending the heat of the day either under a tree, which we have now. We have beautiful trees to sit underneath, and we've created quite a few spaces in the garden with shade. So we've created some pavilions with shade. So sitting in the shade, reading. Summer's a great time to order your bulbs. So all the bulb catalogs come out in summer. So, you know, flicking through those and working out your planting combinations for bulbs. And just it's kind of a time when you can take it a little bit easy in the hottest part of the day.
I like it. Oh, I think I could quite come at that sort of gardening. Oh, thank you, Paul. It's just been fabulous talking to you, and I wish you all the best for getting back to the Cotswolds, and I'm sure that this is going to find its way into many. There'll have to be big Christmas stockings, because as usual it's a beautiful tome that you've put together. But thank you to you and your team at Stonefields for sharing that with us also, and for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.